Great, thanks. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Contensis user webinar. On accessibility basics and introduction to ARIA. I'm Jon Maskrey. I'm a UX engineer working on Contensis, and I'll just go over what we're going to have a look at today. We'll have a look at what ARIA is, the different types of the roles, the states and properties, that kind of thing. And how we can use them to make our sites and apps more accessible to more people. Going to go through some real-world examples of putting some components and bits together, and we'll have a look at or listen to how a screen reader reacts to these attributes that we'll be using, and also compare it to like widgets with and without, so you can see how you can improve basically the life of people who use screen readers. We'll also have a look at some potential pitfalls and gotchas, so when not to use ARIA and how you can make accessibility worse without really knowing it, with the incorrect use of ARIA attributes. So let's do the obvious one first. So what is ARIA and what's it stand for? Well, it's accessible, rich internet applications, and it's just a way to extend HTML to provide more meaning and make it more accessible, basically. It's a framework that allows you to decorate your markup with simple attributes. So here's an example of one here. So we've got the role of menu item on this anchor tag here, and that's essentially all it is. It is very simple. But it can get very complicated in a weird way, as we'll see. And it's really good for complicated user interface controls. So things like tabbed content, modals, custom searchable drop downs, that kind of thing. Things that aren't necessarily browser native, but things you build and maybe you have to give a lot of JavaScript to actually have functionality. And it's also good for reading out dynamic content. So if you've got a change of status where the page doesn't reload, but a tiny part of it changes whatever its text is, or your listing updates, ARIA can let assistive technologies like screen readers know that something is changing and speak that change out to the user. So it can describe the actual types of widgets and elements. So you can use certain bits, certain attributes to say this is a button or something else. You can describe the actual structure of your page using ARIA attributes, and you can alter the semantic meaning. You can add semantic meaning or even remove it and change what elements mean to assistive technologies. And you can label things with it as well and provide more information about elements. And as I said before, give live updates on areas of the page which may have changed. What it doesn't do, it doesn't provide any keyboard functionality in your browser. You have to still do that sort of thing yourself, and in the same way, it doesn't deal with focus management or anything like that, or general browser behavior. You still have to build in functionality yourself. All it really does is pass information to assistive technologies like screen readers, that kind of thing. But first, before we get into the sort of the guts of it, a warning. So it's simple, as you've seen. It's literally just attributes, but it's also really, really powerful. Indeed, one of the first points that's on the ARIA practices page is that no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. And that's because ARIA can hide elements and it can change their semantic meaning. It can even override visible text to a screen reader. And obviously, if it's just doing that to a screen reader, that's not obvious unless you're using a screen reader or some sort of assistive technology. So it's possible to put all these attributes in there and everything works perfectly and works as it should for a visual user, but it can be messed up for other people. So it's really, really important to be familiar with testing with screen readers. And notice that's readers plural. Screen readers are essentially, they're alternative browsers basically, and they work with browsers, existing ones. And like normal web browsers, they've got their own individual idiosyncrasies, they've got their own bugs occasionally. So it's worth testing in a combination of different browsers and different screen readers. I'll be going, showing some examples on this webinar, but I'll be using VoiceOver on a Mac, and that's just one of many. If you're using all the ARIA attributes, it's really useful to run automated accessibility tests like Wave. And they don't pick up everything, and they certainly don't, but they'll often pick up any programmatical issues with these attributes that can be hard to spot ordinarily. So things like they may be pointing at another element that hasn't got the right ID, or multiple IDs for the wrong element, and automated testing will pick this up, but it's only very specific things it will pick up. So it's not something to run instead of manual testing. So always manually test as well. Okay, so that's the warnings out of the way. Let's have a look a bit more closely at the attributes we've got in ARIA. So there are three types of attributes. We've got roles, we've got states, and properties. And to start with, let's have a look at roles. So roles can provide meaning to HTML. So that could be labeling something as a list, for example, or can give extra meaning, for composite widgets, which we'll have a look like in a bit. Things like tabbed interfaces, that sort of thing. And they can also be used to describe the structures and landmarks of a web page. Now, here's some basic HTML elements we've got here. You probably know this. HTML elements can have meaning like the button, the header, and the footer. They're semantic elements. They can also be meaningless, like divs and spans. So they're just like bags of content. They don't actually provide any extra meaning to assistive technologies. Now, applying a role to an element can give it that meaning if it doesn't have it. So you can give a role to a div, and all of a sudden it becomes a semantic element. It can also change its meaning if it already has it, or remove it completely. Let's have a look at a few examples. So here we've got three examples of non-semantic elements, so they're just divs. But by giving them roles, we're telling the screen reader that they're the same as these semantic elements. So even though it's a div, it's now it's now a button, it's now a banner, or a header, it's now a footer. And most modern, all the HTML5 elements and some of the older ones have got a lot of meaning built in. So you don't need to double up. If you've got a button, it doesn't need a role of button on top of that. And the header doesn't need a role of banner. It's already built in, and screen readers understand what they are. I mean, that's not going to sort of break anything. It's just superfluous. You don't need to do it. The only problem you may have is if you put the wrong one in there or misspell a role, then that may break something for a screen reader user. Now you're probably thinking, especially looking at these div equal role equals buttons, why not just use the proper HTML elements? And you'd be exactly right. Most of the time, that's the best thing to do. You shouldn't be marking up divs as buttons really. Only use ARIA roles if you really need to. There are legitimate examples of where you may need to do that. We build Contensis using Angular, and that outputs these custom elements here. So that could be anything with a hyphen in, basically. We've called this one a page header. But that doesn't have any built-in meaning. That's exactly like a div to a screen reader. So we use roles and stuff like that to give these custom elements in Angular meaning. Now, so that was adding meaning to things. Adding a role attribute to an element does also change its meaning. So we've got a link in this example here, and this is part of a bigger thing which I haven't put on there, but we're giving it a role of menu item. And that's now overridden its original meaning of link. So it's not a link anymore to a screen reader. It's part of a menu. Now, the functionality of that link remains the same in a browser. Nothing's changed. If you click on it, it'll navigate you somewhere, but it's just conveyed as a menu item to assistive technology, basically. You do have to be careful with this. So that role will override it, as I said. And if you give it the wrong role, you're going to probably confuse a screen reader user. So here we've got a link, and we've incorrectly marked it as a checkbox. So yeah, maybe a blind user using a screen reader would interact with this, expecting to select something, and all of a sudden they're just navigated away from the page. So you do have to be careful using roles. So that's adding and changing existing sort of roles there. You can also remove the meaning. So in some cases, you may want to hide things or hide the semantics of things from a screen reader. So for example, this image is purely decorational, and so we can remove it by adding the role of presentation. So that's no longer going to be read out by a screen reader. It's essentially the same as if you give it a blank alt attribute, just a different way of doing it. A slightly more complicated example of that, and this is one we're going to have a look at in a bit more detail later on. We've got a tab list here, and originally this is an unordered list with some list items inside it, but it's not anymore because we've given it the role of tab list. So this is no longer a normal list, and a tab list doesn't have children which are normal list items. They have tabs. So we've given the list item here a role of presentation, which takes it out of the accessibility tree, and now a screen reader, for example, would read this out as a tab list with 3 tabs. It'll ignore the list items inside there, which it should do. Right, so that's adding, removing, and changing meaning of things. You've also got to remember a role is a promise that the thing you've given a role to is going to work in a way you say it's going to. So if you give something a role of button, you need to ensure it does function as a button. So we've got a div with a role button here and one with a role checkbox. None of these are divs to a browser. They've got no particular functionality. You can't navigate to them with a keyboard unless you do something to allow that. It doesn't have any default style. And there's a lot of different states with the checkbox you've got to deal with. So it's up to the developer to make sure it does and behaves in the way that you say it's going to. I mean, if at all possible, use the right elements in the first place. So use a button element. Here we go. So I can't think of any reason why you would use a div with a roller button, but use the button. You get a lot of stuff of behavior for free with that. And again, for a checkbox, use an actual input type of checkbox and give it a proper label. So use native HTML wherever possible, and only fall back to ARIA attributes as a last resort, really. Right, there are quite a few different types of role, and they cover a lot of different aspects. We've got widgets, which are generally things like buttons, checkboxes, and the menu items we've seen before. So they're singular things, and they've got usually some sort of interactivity. So that's your basic kind of widget. We've also got composite roles. So I put that example of a tab list again. So these are things that are built up from the smaller widgets. So we've got a tab list role, and we've got the tab role inside here. And there's a load of others on there as well. We've got document structure. So this is basically kind of your HTML elements. So you could do a list. So instead of using an unordered list and list items, you can do it all as divs, and it has the same meaning. again, don't do that by default. Or an article, so you could give something a role of article when it's just a div, that kind of thing. So document structure there. Similar to that, you've also got landmarks. So the regions of the page, like headers, footers, navigation, that kind of thing. And again, don't give you all those examples and then telling you not to do this if it's all possible. So this is where you use the proper header elements, nav elements, main elements. But this is what you can use it for, to enhance things, and when you haven't got full control over certain markup, maybe. We've also got windows. So for example, a dialogue, some sort of modal pop-up. And regions that are read out automatically. So live regions, like an alert. So this could be something important's happened on the page. It's got a role of alert, and that basically interrupts a screen reader user and says, wait, hang on, something important's happened here. Here's the information. So it speaks to that as soon as it happens. There's a lot of these, and obviously we can't cover them all in the time we've got. But check out the MDN docs on ARIA roles. There's a lot of information in there, and they go into a lot more information on the actual individual roles as well. But we'll stick these links up in the Slack channel at the end. Right, so there are your roles. We've also got states and properties. So as we've just seen, roles are attributes that define the type of UI element. States and properties are attributes as well that can give screen reader users more information on what state an element is in, what relationship it may have with other elements, whether it's changed, is it hidden, does it have a pop-up, and a lot more. And I'll go through some examples again. So the widget examples, so that apply to a single widget or element. You've got things like, is it checked, what's the label text, and these are quite a mix of states and properties. So some of them have values that could be free text, some are like booleans, and some are specific options. And we'll have a look at a couple of these. So let's have a look at the buttons first. Well, this button example with ARIA label. So we're basically using ARIA label to name something. And in this example, we're using a button, and buttons are one of those elements that get their accessible name from their content. So buttons do it, links do that as well. Whatever the content of a link is its accessible name. So this one, will be known as a button, and its name is submit. And the ARIA label could be used to override that content and provide a different name. Now, you may have seen this somewhere. Sometimes they've not got the best names. So here, example could be like a close button for a modal. So you may have seen these in the top right-hand corner of a modal. You've got a little round button, it's got an X. It may be the letter X like we've got here, or it could be an SVG icon or an image or something like that, something non-text. And that isn't a great name for a screen reader user. They'd get read out. In this case, it would be button X, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything. So what we can do with that is we can add the ARIA label and give it some text. So in this case, closed modal, and that overrides whatever text is in that button, which is great in this case. But again, it's one of those things you've got to be careful with. Because the ARIA label, it exists only really in code. You don't see it on a website. It's not displayed. It's either in code or it's spoken out with the screen reader. If any time down the line your code changes and the button changes functionality, you've got to be careful and make sure you do update the ARIA label as well, because it's easy for that to go out of sync. So it's just something to be careful of. Another example here, we've got ARIA hidden, which hides content but only from a screen reader or assistive technology. So you add that attribute, give it it's a boolean, so give it true. That doesn't hide it from the browser, so that's still visible unless you do something extra in CSS to hide it. And finally, from these widgets, we'll have a look at the has pop-up. And this is useful for letting the screen reader know that the button they're about to press, so when they've got focus of the button, is going to do something like open a pop-up up, open a menu, or in this case, open up a dialog modal screen. So when you land on that, you get told it's a button, you get told it's about adding an address, and it's going to open up a modal window. And it's just one of those ones that's got set values that you can add. So it can be true, it can be menu, list box, tree, grid, or dialog in this case. Also got relationships. So this is where you can link up different elements and say that they've got a relationship with this other element. And it's usually the ID of the element in question. A good one to look at here is ARIA describes by. So this is another way of naming something, very similar to ARIA labels. I've just realized I put the wrong one in here. This isn't ARIA described by, this is ARIA labeled by. So ignore that on the left. ARIA labeled by, I should have put. And this is taking its label from this heading here. So the H2 with the ID of heading 1 is just called name. And the input below it is now basically, it's got a label of name because we're pointing at that. And this is often the preferable way to using it. So rather than using ARIA label, which as we saw before, isn't visible on a page, it's just in the code. This is naming something by something that's visible on a page. So it's a preferable way to do it. You can see it, and if something's wrong with it or it's changed, it's more obvious. And we've got live regions. So similar to the alert we saw before, live regions automatically read out their content when the text inside it changes. The example here I'll use is ARIA live. And I love this one because it's ARIA live and it's got a value of polite. So what that means is when something inside this div changes, like maybe it's showing 5 results now, it's set to polite ARIA live. So it'll wait until you've stopped doing stuff and then it'll announce now it's showing 5 results. So it doesn't butt in and just say it. The opposite of that is if you put ARIA live equals assertive, and then it'll interrupt you. So that's for more pressing things like alerts. You've done something wrong, you need to stop and fix something. So we've seen some quite simple examples of roles, states, and the properties in code. Let's have a look at some real world uses and how they work with an actual screen reader. So we'll look at naming regions first. And in the last webinar, which you may or may not have seen, but we looked at the importance of semantic HTML. So that's HTML that conveys a meaning. And this was one of the examples we looked at, simple layout. And we could have marked it up with meaningless divs. So we've got a div for everything here, just giving it a class, whatever, to style it. And that doesn't mean anything to a screen reader. And we swapped them out for elements that convey meaning. So like the header element here, and a nav element here. And we saw how screen reader software uses these semantic elements to describe the actual structure of the page to non-sighted users. So why do we need something else here to help? So why do we need ARIA? Well, in addition to these landmarks, we can give a screen reader user more information by labeling it on top of this. So let's have a look at an example here. Here's a stripped back look at that page HTML, and I've put a little sort of outline of what the page looks like on the right hand side. And to start off with, I've labeled the navigation in the header with main, because we've got 2 navigations on this page. So we've got the main one for the site, and we've got the footer navigation, which, you know, stuff like, I don't know, contact us, here's my privacy information, that kind of thing. And it's really useful to be able to differentiate between these as a screen reader user. So, you know, you've got 2 navigations, one of them's the main, one's the footer. Notice I've just labeled them with in a very simple and concise way. So I've not called the top one main navigation, because the actual navigation role of this gets read out automatically. So if I'd labeled it main navigation, it would read out main navigation. So a simple main and a simple footer for these two nav elements. Notice I'm using ARIA label there because in this design we've not got any visible text to label these by. But for the aside here, which is the testimonial sidebar, we've labeled that using ARIA labeled by and given it the ID of the heading that's inside it. So we've got some visible text there. There we go. So it targets the ID, and now that aside is labeled by the heading that's inside it. So let's have a look at how a screen reader deals with that. So I'm going to jump out of the presentation and jump into Safari. Let's give it a quick refresh, make sure everything's set as it should be. So this is the page we saw in the code. I'm going to open up VoiceOver, which is the Mac screen reader, and it'll start talking at me.
VoiceOver on Safari.
I'll stop that. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use one of the shortcuts to open up the rotor controls so I can have a look at the sort of landmarks of the page.
Landmarks menu.
So here we go, we've got a landmarks menu, it speaks out what it is, and I can see and cycle through these. So
banner, main navigation.
There we go, we've got the main navigation, and also
testimonials complementary.
Got the testimonials sidebar bit and the footer navigation.
Footer navigation.
So you can see, like, straight away we've given a screen reader user a bit more information and helped with their mental model of the sections of the page. Let's get rid of VoiceOver, or we'll just start talking at me.
Home, web content. VoiceOver off.
There we go. So yeah, that's the first example with VoiceOver. Let's pop back into Keynote. Let's have a look at a couple of widget examples next. But before we do, here's another link that I'll put up at the end. This is a link to the W3C examples page for widgets, and it gives design patterns and sort of instructions for how you can put together for these different widgets. There's quite a lot of them. It's a great resource, and it goes through keyboard interaction, possible HTML structure you can use, and of course the roles and attributes for ARIA that you need to use with it. It's a great starting point though. I mean, these are the basics. The examples here aren't the be all and end all, that they can be improved. And indeed, I think the gov.uk site's done a lot of testing on certain aspects of the certain design patterns, and they've improved upon these. But it's a great area to learn, and if you've got a certain widget that falls under one of these, it's a good place to start looking to see what you need to do with it. Let's have a look at some specific examples. We'll have a look at tabs first. So this is going to be a basic example of a tabbed interface. So we've got another unordered list with a bunch of list items inside that, which make up the tab list and the tabs. And underneath that, we've got the tab content. So we've got 3 divs, which represent each of the content for tab 1, 2, and 3. We've labeled it. We've not got a visible label, so we're using ARIA label. And we've given the tab list a label which describes what this is going to be about. So when a screen reader user hits this first time, it'll say, it's a tab list about Contensis. And immediately you'll know, oh, do I need to go through all these tabs, or can I just ignore and go to the next thing because I know all about Contensis? So it gives you, some information about it before you even have to go through it. Also the role of tab list, because that's what this section is. And each of these individual tabs have got a role of tab. And the content of each tab has been given the role of tab panel. So we've got, it's a composite widget, we've got 3 roles here. Now, this is one of those attributes that describes the relationship. So this first tab here has got an ARIA controls attribute which points to tab content 1. So that's this one down here. So we can see we've got a relationship with that tab and that tab content. And it works both ways. So we've also labeled that tab content by the tab itself. So we've got kind of a two-way relationship. So it helps describe to screen reader users, what this is and how it's related to each other. And finally, we've got ARIA selected true on that first tab because that's the one that's displayed by default. Obviously, when we go, if we want to select the second tab, that'll disappear off there, and the second tab will receive ARIA selected true. So it's your standard tabs, basically. Now let's have a look at that and how a screen reader deals with this. And what we're going to do with this one is have a look at sort of a bad one versus a good one, with in terms of accessibility. Let's jump out and back to Safari. Okay, so we're back in Safari, and I've put two examples on here, and yeah, I've given one a bad tabs title there. Now, if I click through as a sighted user, these kind of work in the same way. They work as you'd expect them to. Unless I looked on using something else, I wouldn't know there's anything wrong with these. They work for a mouse user and someone who's sighted. But the bad tabs are actually quite bad. So not only have they got no ARIA attributes, they've got no keyboard navigation. So it just skips them completely as if they're not there. Interestingly, I built this in React, and I just thought to save some time, I'll just Google tabs for React. These were both on the first page of Google. One was like a package, which is the accessible one, and one was just like a little tutorial about how you can build your own tabs. And yeah, the bad tabs has had no mention of accessibility at all. It's just like, yep, here you go. This is how you do it, just using React. So you've got to be careful. But anyway, let's have a listen to how these two differ when you're using the screen reader. So let's get VoiceOver up again.
VoiceOver on Safari.
This time I'm going to open the rotor and go to the headings menu.
Landmarks menu. Windows spot menu. Links headings menu.
And navigate to the bad tabs.
Heading level 2. Bad tabs frown.
Bad tabs frown, there we go. Select that.
Heading level 2. Bad tabs frown.
Okay, so have a listen for what happens next when I navigate using the keyboard shortcut for VoiceOver to jump to the next element. Have a listen what happens when I hit that.
Content modeling. Clickable. You are currently on a text element.
So I'm not getting an awful lot of information there. I know it's content modeling, a bit of text. I know it's clickable. So I'll usually on VoiceOver to click stuff and interact things, you do Control Option and space. So let's do that. And I'm just getting a funny noise. I'm not getting anything from that. So if I couldn't see this page, I'd be like, oh, I don't really know what's going on. So I'll jump to the next element.
Tools your editors will love. Clickable. You are currently on a text element.
Okay, so it's tools your editors will love. Okay, I'll click on it again. Maybe this will work. Now I can see it's worked. I can see it's done something. But if I couldn't see the screen, I wouldn't know. So at this point, I'll probably just flick through and see what's happening. So
a well-oiled workflow. Clickable.
And then again.
Creating content is simple with a form-like interface.
Right. I'm getting some actual content read out to me there, but what's that content related to? I don't really know. So that's not a great experience for a screen reader user. So let's have a listen to the more accessible tabs version on this. So we've put some ARIA attributes on this. So let's jump through to it.
Heading level 2, accessible tabs.
Let's go to the first item there.
About Contensis, tab group. You are currently in a tab group.
Great, so I've been told I'm in a tab group, and this tab group is about Contensis. So if I wanted to know about that, I can dive into this. So let's go into the first element. Content
modeling, selected tab, 1 of 3. You are currently on a selected tab, 1 of 3.
Great. So yeah, it's told me I'm on a tab. It's selected. It's about content modeling, and there's 3 tabs in this tab list. So if I wanted to know about content modeling, I can now just hit tab and go straight to this section.
Main content modeling tab panel. You are currently on a.
There we go. I don't want to. I want to see what else is in this section, so I'm just going to jump back.
Content modeling.
And go to the next one.
Tools your editors will love. Tab 2 of 3.
So I'm going to have listen to that. So I'm going to click on that.
Tools your editors will love. Selected tab 2 of 3. Main tools your editors will love. Tab panel. You are currently on a tab panel. Creating content is simple with a form-like interface. You can drop frequent.
There we go. So we can easily navigate through this, and we're told what's related to what. We know it's a tab panel. We know it's a tab list. We know there are tabs. They've got names, and it's a much easier way of describing things and working out what's going on than the one above, which was pretty impossible to use if you couldn't see the screen. So let's turn off
voiceover off
and jump back in to Keynote. Okay, next up, modals. So this is probably something that's on a lot of people's sites. It's a bit more simple than the tab panel, to be fair. So we've got a simple modal. I've got the code underneath there. I've given it a role of dialogue so that a screen reader, for example, will know it's going to be a modal. We've given it ARIA modal of true, and that tells the screen reader that the content that's behind this modal is unavailable, and so it can't be interacted with until the modal is closed. And we've labeled it, so we've used ARIA labeled by. We've labeled by the modal title, the heading 1 that's inside the modal. So great, using a visible label there. And finally, there's the close button I've spoken about a couple of times, and it's just an X, or it could be an SVG or something, but we've labeled it with ARIA label equals closed. So quite a simple one. So we're just adding a few attributes to this, and let's have a look. Right, refresh, get voiceover back on.
Voiceover on.
Okay, so I've done the same thing here. So I've got 2 examples, one with ARIA and one without, basically.
ARIA.
Let's just turn him off.
Edit your name.
Actually, I'll turn voiceover off. So before I turn it on, these are the same things. They work in the same way. Yeah, there we go. But it's just one has ARIA, one doesn't. So let's turn voiceover back on.
Voiceover on Safari.
I'll get the rotor up again.
Headings menu.
And go to no ARIA.
Heading level 2. Heading level 2. No ARIA.
So have a listen to what happens when I focus on this link, sorry, this button first.
Edit your name. Button. You are currently on a button.
So I'm on the button, it's edit your name. I've got no more information than that. So I'm going to click on it.
First name, edit text.
Now it's focused on that first focusable element because that's something that's set up in the code. That's nothing to do with ARIA. But notice it hasn't told me anything else really. It's just, if I couldn't see the screen, I wouldn't know that I'm in the modal now. It's not told me what the modal's about really, apart from the thing on the button. And if I flick through it.
Second name, edit text, submit, button.
So there's a submit button on that. So if I couldn't see this, I might be a bit confused. If I submit that, am I going to refresh the whole page? What's going to happen? I'll hit the next element on there.
X button.
And that's where I've got the X button. So don't know what that does. It's just an X button. Actually, to be fair, if I was a regular screen reader user, I'd probably work out that an X button probably means close, that someone's forgotten to put the ARIA attribute on there. So yeah, that could be, it's usable, but it could be confusing to a non-sighted user. So let's close that.
Edit your name.
And I'm just going to jump
Heading
up.
leveled.
So let's have a listen.
Advanced.
Sorry, key VoiceOver does talk a lot. Right, let's settle down now. So yeah, let's have a listen to what VoiceOver says when we go to this next button, because there's another attribute on this.
Edit your name. Dialog pop-up button. You are currently on a...
There we go, edit your name, dialog pop-up button. So I know what it's called, I know it's a button, and I know it's going to open up a dialog pop-up. So already I'm primed to know I'm going to get a modal. So we'll click on it and have a listen to what happens then.
Edit your name, web dialog with 4 items. First name, edit text.
Great, so yeah, it's given me the name of the label of the pop-up itself. So it says edit your name. It's told me it's a web dialog. It's told me it's got 4 items in there that I can interact with. And it's told me the one I'm on. So I know there's 4 things in there straight away. So I can flick through those.
Second name, submit, but close button.
And
You are currently...
We've got the close button. It says close, but yeah, we know what it means. We've given it the ARIA label of close, so it's not just X. Right, let's turn them off again.
VoiceOver off.
That's keynote. Right, and finally, we can have a look at live regions. So these are areas that can change and to provide updates to the user. So it could be a list that's being filtered, notifications or validation errors on forms, that kind of thing. And we're going to look at a filtered list. So here's the stripped back HTML, so we can see an example on the right-hand side of what it actually looks like. We've got the search form here, and we've got the results in the list underneath there. And we've got this little area here, which is our ARIA live area. So that's showing 30 results. And a couple of bits to this. We've given it the ARIA live with polite, so it's not going to just interrupt us no matter what we're doing. It'll wait until we've stopped interacting before it tells us we've got 30 results. But also we've given, I love the name of this, ARIA atomic equals true. Now what we're doing with this, every time we get a different number of results, we're only updating the number of results. We're not updating the whole text string. So by giving it ARIA atomic equals true, that's telling the screen reader to read out the whole sentence. If we didn't do that and we got 5 results after searching, it would say 5 or 6. But by doing this, it says it's showing 5 results. It'll read the whole lot out. And as a little bonus, we've got this down here. So if you remember at the beginning, I said, don't double up. If you've got something that is already a list, you don't need to add the role of list to it. And that's exactly what I've done here. And this is just a little example of why you need to test and learn sort of foibles and bugs of screen readers. There's been a bug in VoiceOver that removes the semantics of a list. So it won't read this out as a list when you style it with CSS to have a list style of none. So just to get rid of the bullets, which is just weird, but that's the way it is as a bug, and it does that. But by adding the role of list back in there, sorts it all out. So now VoiceOver recognizes it as a list again. So there's a little weird one I thought would be nice to put it in there. Let's have a look at a demo. Right, go to the filter example. Okay, so yeah, this is just going to put together, sorry about the weird sort of usernames. This is taken from GitHub's API, and it's just a bunch of users on GitHub that you can publicly access for this. And it's a usual sort of search stroke filter. So if I put in cats and hit search there, it'd show the bloke that's called white cats. Let's reset it. So this is where we've got our live region here. So let's break out VoiceOver again.
VoiceOver on Safari.
And get the rows of controls up.
Headings.
And this time I'm going to just look for form items.
Form controls menu.
and go to the usernames search text field.
Search usernames, search text field.
So I'm going to go for I'm going to type in Mojo because I know there's two of these.
O-J-O. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type.
So I've done that. I'll just go to the search box, search button, sorry, and hit search and have a listen.
Showing 2 results for Mojo.
So fantastic. I've been told automatically I've got results. There's 2 results for whatever I've put in there. I don't need to navigate to anything to work that out. And just to prove that these are shown as announced as list items, now we put that roll back in.
Showing to list 2 items.
There we go.
You are currently in a list. Showing to search Mojo insertion at end of.
So you can also, you can do that with anything. So if I put, I know that my name's not in there. So if I stick John in there,
search button. You are sorry, no results have been found for John.
Which is great. I now know I don't need to go looking down a page of searching for something that's not there. So it's a great way of saving time and just helping out screen reader users as they work through your app. And it's not the only thing you can do with that. I know there's certain things. I've built this with React and it's a single page app. So when you go between pages, it doesn't actually reload the page. It just changes the content. Now, screen reader users or screen readers read out when a page reloads, and it'll read the title of the page, so you know you've kind of navigated somewhere. And as that's not happening with a single page app, that can be confusing. So you could theoretically click on a link and not realize you have navigated. And you can have like a singular live region hidden somewhere on your page that its sole job is to announce, when you've changed the page. You do have to build that yourself. It's not built in like with just basic HTML and server-side code. And I've done a very basic example of this. So if I jump to the navigation.
Form control, heading, links, Windows, landmarks menu, banner, main navigation. You are currently in a navigation. Visited, link, tab example.
So hopefully when I click on this, it should tell me it should read out the title of the page that I've now navigated to.
Tab example.
There we go. So it's a tiny thing, but it's something you have to consider when you're building single page apps. And yeah, it's something you can do with Live Region.
Voiceover off.
Okay, so that's it. So to sum up what we've looked at, and it's been quite a whistle-stop tour of ARIA. There's a lot still there, but yeah, ARIA is a way of making your HTML more accessible to more people. And yeah, it uses just very simple attributes in the HTML, so it's quite simple to implement. Yeah, you can describe your widgets with it, and especially good for the more complicated widgets, announcing changes and that kind of thing. It's simple, but it is very powerful. So it's easy to use, but it's also easy to cause issues with, and it is easy to make accessibility worse if you get it wrong. So yeah, try not to use ARIA if you don't need to. Try and stick with native HTML wherever possible, and only use it for like specific widgets or considered enhancements to naming, for example. And yeah, have a good read up on those widgets you want to sort of enhance with it, and do your best to follow the best practices and understand what it will do for assistive technologies and how it works with screen readers. And just to reiterate, yeah. Test it and test it properly with multiple screen readers. Make sure it makes sense to your ears, not just to your eyes. Yeah, thank you very much.